Hell's Event by Clive Barker. Read by Greg Blackman. Hell came up to the streets and squares of London that September, icy from the depths of the ninth circle, too frozen to be warmed even by the swelter of an Indian summer. It had laid its plans as carefully as ever, plans being what they were, and fragile. This time it was perhaps a little more finicky than usual, checking every last detail twice or three times to be certain it had every chance of winning this vital game. It had never lacked competitive spirit. It had matched fire against flesh 1,000 times down the centuries, sometimes winning, more often losing. Wages were, after all, the stuff of its advancement. Without the human urge to compete, to bargain and to bet, pandemonium might well have fallen for want of citizens. Dancing, dog racing, fiddle playing, it was all one to the Gulfs, all a game in which it might, if it played with sufficient wit, garner a soul or two. That's why Hell came up to London that bright blue day. To run a race, and to win, if it could, enough souls to keep it busy with perdition another age. Cameron tuned his radio. The voice of the commentator flared and faded as though he was speaking from the pole instead of St. Paul's Cathedral. It was still a good half hour before the race, but Cameron wanted to listen to the warm-up commentary, just to hear what they were saying about his boy.
Atmosphere is electric, probably tens of thousands along the route.
The voice disappeared. Cameron cursed and toyed with the dial until the imbecilities reappeared.
Called the race of the year, and what a day it is, isn't it, Jim?
It certainly is, mate.
That's big Jim Delaney, who's up there in the eye in the sky, and he'll be following the race along the route, giving us the bird's eye view, won't you, Jim?
I certainly will, mate.
Well, there's a lot of activity behind the line. The competitors are all loosening up for the start. I can see Nick Lawyer there. He's wearing number 3, and I must say he's looking very fit. He said to me when he arrived he didn't usually like to run on Sundays, but he's made an exception for this race because, of course, it's a charity event. All the proceeds will be going to cancer research. Joel Jones, our gold medalist in the 800 metres, is here, and he'll be running against his great rival Frank McLeod. And beside the big boys, we've got a smattering of new faces. Wearing number 5, the South African Malcolm Voigt, and completing the field, Lester Kinderman, who was, of course, the surprise winner of the marathon in Austria last year. And I must say, they all look fresh as daisies on this superb afternoon. Couldn't ask for a better day, could we, Jim?
Joel had woken with bad dreams. "You'll be fine, stop fretting," Cameron had told him. But he didn't feel fine. He felt sick in the pit of his stomach. Not pre-race nerves, he was used to those and could deal with the feeling. 2 fingers down the throat and throw up. That was the best remedy he'd found. Get it over and done with. No, this wasn't pre-race nerves or anything like them. It was deeper. For a start, as though his bowels to his centre, to his source, were cooking. Cameron had no sympathy. "It's a charity race, not the Olympics," he said, looking the boy over. "At your age." That was Cameron's technique. His mellow voice was made for coaxing, but was used to bully. Without that bullying, there would have been no gold medal, no cheering crowds, no admiring girls. One of the tabloids had voted Joel the best-loved black face in England. It was good to be greeted as a friend by people he'd never met. He liked the admiration, however short-lived it might turn out to be. "They love you," said Cameron. "God knows why. They love you." Then he laughed, his little cruelty over. "You'll be all right, son," he said. "Get out and run for your life." Now, in the broad daylight, Joel looked at the rest of the field and felt a little more buoyant. Kinderman had stamina, but he had no finishing power over middle distance. Marathon technique was a different skill altogether. Besides, he was so short-sighted he wore rimmed glasses so thick they gave him the look of a bemused frog. No danger there. Lawyer, he was good, but this wasn't really his distance either. He was a hurdler, and a sometime sprinter. 400 metres was his limit, and even then he wasn't happy. Voigt, the South African. Well, there was not much information on him. Obviously a fit man to judge by the look of him, and someone to watch out for just in case he sprung a surprise. But the real problem of the race was McLeod. Joel had run against Frank Flash McLeod 3 times, twice beating him into second place, once, painfully, had the positions reversed. And Frankie boy had a few scores to settle, especially the Olympics defeat. He hadn't liked taking the silver. Frank was the man to watch. Charity race or no charity race, McLeod would be running his best for the crowd and for his pride. He was at the line already, testing his starting position, his ears practically pricked. Flash was the man, no doubt of it. For a moment, Joel caught Voigt staring at him. Unusual, that. Competitors seldom even glanced at each other before a race. It was a kind of coyness. The man's face was pale, and his hairline was receding. He looked to be in his early 30s, but had a younger, leaner physique. Long legs, big hands, a body somehow out of proportion to his head. When their eyes met, Voigt looked away. The fine chain around his neck caught the sun, and the crucifix he was wearing glinted gold as it swung gently beneath his chin. Joel had his good luck charm with him too, tucked into the waistband of his shorts, a lock of his mother's hair, which she had plaited for him half a decade ago, before his first major race. She had returned to Barbados the following year and died there. A great grief. An unforgettable loss. Without Cameron, he would have crumbled. Cameron watched the preparations from the steps of the cathedral. He planned to see the start, then ride his bike around the back of the Strand to catch the finish. He'd arrived well before the competitors, and he could keep up with the race on his radio. He felt good with the day. His boy was in fine shape, nausea or no nausea, and the race was an ideal way to keep the lad in a competitive mood without overstretching him. It was quite a distance, of course, across Ludgate Circus, across Fleet Street, past Temple Bar into the Strand, then cutting across the corner of Trafalgar and down Whitehall to the Houses of Parliament. Running on tarmac too. But it was good experience for Joel, and it would pressure him a little, which was useful. There was a distance runner in the boy, and Cameron knew it. He'd never been a sprinter. He couldn't pace himself accurately enough. He needed distance and time to find his pulse, to settle down, and to work out his tactics. Over 800 metres, the boy was a natural. His stride was a model of economy, his rhythm damn near perfect. But more, he had courage. Courage had won him the gold, and courage would take him first to the finish again and again. That's what made Joel different. Any number of technical whiz-kids came and went, but without courage to supplement those skills, they went for almost nothing. To risk when it was worth risking, to run till the pain blinded you, that was special, and Cameron knew it. He liked to think he'd had a little of it himself. Today, the boy looked less than happy. Women trouble was Cameron's bet. There were always problems with women, especially with the golden boy reputation Joel had garnered. He tried to explain that there'd be plenty of time for bed and board when his career had run out of steam, but Joel wasn't interested in celibacy, and Cameron didn't altogether blame him. The pistol was raised and fired, a plume of blue-white smoke, followed by a sound more pop than bang. The shot woke the pigeons from the dome of St. Paul's, and they rose in a chattering congregation, their worship interrupted. Joel was off to a good start, clean, neat, and fast. The crowd began to call his name immediately, their voices at his back, at his side, a gale of loving enthusiasm. Cameron watched the first 24 yards as the field jockeyed for a running order. Lawyer was at the front of the pack, though Cameron wasn't sure whether he'd got there by choice or by chance. Joel was behind McLeod, who was behind Lawyer. "No hurry, boy," said Cameron, and slipped away from the starting line. His bicycle was chained up in Paternoster Row, a minute's walk from the square. He'd always hated cars, godless things, crippling, inhuman, unchristian things. With a bike, you were your own master. Wasn't that all a man could ask? And it's a superb start here to what looks like a potentially marvellous race. They're already across the square and the crowd's going wild here. It really is more like the European Games than a charity race. What does it look like to you, Jim?
Well, mate, I can see crowds lining the route all the way across Fleet Street, and I've been asked by the police to tell people please not to try and drive down to see the race because, of course, all of these roads have been cleared for the event, and if you try and drive, really, you'll get nowhere. Who's got the lead at the moment? Well, Nick Lawyers, he really is setting the pace at this stage in the game, although, of course, as we know, there's going to be a lot of tactical running over this kind of distance. It's more than a middle distance, and it's less than a marathon, but these men are all tacticians, and they'll be trying to let each other make the running in the early stages. Cameron always said, let the others be the heroes. That was a hard lesson to learn, Joel had found. When the pistol was fired, it was difficult not to go for broke, unwind suddenly, like a tight spring. All gone in the first 200 yards, and nothing left in reserve. It's easy to be a hero, Cameron used to say. It's not clever at all. Don't waste your time showing off. Just let the supermen have their moment. Hang on to the pack, but hold back a little. Better to be cheered at the post because you won than have them call you a good-hearted loser. Win, 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 at all costs, at almost all costs. Win. The man who doesn't want to win is no friend of mine, he'd say. If you want to do it for the love of it, for the sport of it, do it with somebody else. Only public school boys believe that crap about the joy of playing the game. There's no joy for losers, boy. What did I say? There's no joy for losers. Be barbaric. Play the rules, but play them to the limit. As far as you can push, push. Let no other son of a bitch tell you differently. You're here to win. What did I say? Win. In Paternoster Row, the cheering was muted, and the shadows of the buildings blocked the sun. It was almost cold. The pigeons still passed over, unable to settle now they'd been roused from their roost. They were the only occupants of the back streets. The rest of the living world, it seemed, was watching this race. Cameron unlocked his bicycle, pocketed the chain and padlocks, and hopped on. Pretty healthy for a 50-year-old, he thought, despite the addiction to cheap cigars. He switched on the radio. Reception was bad, walled in by the buildings, all crackle. He stood aside his bike and tried to improve the tuning. It did little good. Nick Lawyer is falling behind already. That was quick. Mind you, Lawyer was past his prime by 2 or 3 years. Time to throw in the spikes and let the younger men take over. He'd had to do it, though my God it had been painful. Cameron remembered acutely how he'd felt at 33 when he realised that his best running years were over. It was like having one foot buried in the grave, a salutary reminder of how quickly the body blooms and begins to wither. As he pedalled out of the shadows into a sunnier street, a black Mercedes, chauffeur-driven, sailed past so quietly it could have been wind-propelled. Cameron caught sight of the passengers only briefly. One he recognised as a man Voight had been talking to before the race, a thin-faced individual of about 40, with a mouth so tight his lips might have been surgically removed. Beside him sat Voight. Impossible as it seemed, it was Voight's face that glanced back out of the smoked glass windows. He was even dressed for the race. Cameron didn't like the look of this at all. He'd seen the South African 5 minutes earlier off and running. So who was this? A double, obviously. It smelt of a fix, somehow. It stank to high heaven. The Mercedes was already disappearing around a corner. Cameron turned off the radio and pedalled pell-mell after the car. The balmy sun made him sweat as he rode. The Mercedes was threading its way through the narrow streets with some difficulty, ignoring all the one-way signs as it went. Its slow passage made it relatively easy for Cameron to keep the vehicle in view without being seen by its occupants, though the effort was beginning to light a fire in his lungs. In a tiny, nameless alley just west of Fetter Lane, where the shadows were particularly dense, the Mercedes stopped. Cameron, hidden from view round a corner not 20 yards from the car, watched as the door was opened by the chauffeur, and the lipless man with the Voight look-alike close behind stepped out and went into a nondescript building. When all three had disappeared, Cameron propped up his bike against the wall and followed. The street was pin-drop hushed. From this distance, the roar of the crowd was only a murmur. It could have been another world, this street. The flitting shadows of birds, the windows of the buildings bricked up, the peeling paint, the rotten smell in the still air. A dead rabbit lay in the gutter, a black rabbit with a white collar, somebody's lost pet.
Flies rose and fell on it, alternately startled and ravenous. Cameron crept towards the open door as quietly as he was able. He had, as it turned out, nothing to fear. The trio had disappeared down the dark hallway of the house long since. The air was cool in the hall and smelt of damp. Looking fearless, but feeling afraid, Cameron entered the blind building. The wallpaper in the hallway was shit-coloured, the paint the same. It was like walking into a bowel, a dead man's bowel, cold and shitty. Ahead, the stairway had collapsed, preventing access to the upper story. They had not gone up, but down. The door to the cellar was adjacent to the defunct staircase, and Cameron could hear voices from below. No time like the present, he thought, and opened the door sufficiently to squeeze into the dark beyond. It was icy. Not just cold, not damp, but refrigerated. For a moment he thought he'd stepped into a cold storage room. His breath became a mist at his lips. His teeth wanted to chatter. Can't turn back now, he thought, and started down the frost-slick steps. It wasn't impossibly dark. At the bottom of the flight, a long way down, a pale light flickered, its uninspired glow aspiring to the day. Cameron glanced longingly round at the open door behind him. It looked extremely tempting, but he was curious, so curious. There was nothing to do but descend. In his nostrils, the scent of the place teased. He had a lousy sense of smell and a worse palate, as his wife was fond of reminding him. She'd say he couldn't distinguish between garlic and a rose, and it was probably true. But the smell in this deep meant something to him, something that stirred the acid in his belly into life. Goats. It smelt... Ha! He wanted to tell her there and then how he'd remembered. It smelt of goats. He was almost at the bottom of the stairs, 20, maybe 30 feet underground. The voices were still some distance away behind a second door. He was standing in a little chamber, its walls badly whitewashed and scrawled with obscene graffiti, mostly pictures of the sex act. On the floor, a candelabra, 7-forked. Only 2 of the dingy candles were lit, and they burned with a guttering flame that was almost blue. The goaty smell was stronger now, and mingled with a scent so sickly sweet it belonged in a Turkish brothel. 2 doors led off the chamber, and from behind one, Cameron heard the conversation continuing. With scrupulous caution, he crossed the slippery floor to the door, straining to make sense of the murmuring voices. There was an urgency in them. Hurry! The right skills. Children. Laughter. I believe we... Tomorrow, all of us. Laughter again. Suddenly the voices seemed to change direction, as if the speakers were moving back towards the door. Cameron took 3 steps back across the icy floor, almost colliding with the candelabra. The flames spat and whispered in the chamber as he passed. He had to choose either the stairs or the other door. The stairs represented utter retreat. If he climbed them, he'd be safe, but he would never know. Never know why the cold, why the blue flames, why the smell of goats. The door was a chance. Back to it, his eyes on the door opposite, he fought with the bitingly cold brass handle. It turned with some tussling, and he ducked out of sight as the door opposite opened. The 2 movements were perfectly syncopated. God was with him. Even as he closed the door, he knew he'd made an error. God wasn't with him at all. Needles of cold penetrated his head, his teeth, his eyes, his fingers. He felt as though he'd been thrown naked into the heart of an iceberg. His blood seemed to stand still in his veins. The spit on his tongue crystallized. The mucus on the lining of his nose pricked as it turned to ice. The cold seemed to cripple him. He couldn't even turn around. Barely able to move his joints, he fumbled for a cigarette lighter with fingers so numb they could have been cut off without him feeling it. The lighter was already glued to his hand. The sweat on his fingers had turned to frost. He tried to ignite it against the dark, against the cold. Reluctantly, it sparked into a spluttering half-life. The room was large, an ice cavern. Its walls, its encrusted roof, sparkled and shone. Stalactites of ice, lance-sharp, hung over his head.
The floor on which he stood, poised uncertainly, was raked towards a hole in the middle of the room. 5 or 6 feet across, its edges and walls were so lined with ice it seemed as though a river had been arrested as it poured down into the darkness. He thought of Xanadu, a poem he knew by heart, Visions of Another Albion, where Alph the sacred river ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. If there was indeed a sea down there, it was a frozen sea. It was death forever. It was as much as he could do to keep upright, to prevent himself from sliding down the incline towards the unknown. The lighter flickered as an icy air blew it out. "Shit!" said Cameron as he was plunged into darkness. Whether the word alerted the trio outside or whether God deserted him totally at that moment and invited them to open the door, he would never know. But as the door swung wide, it pushed Cameron off his feet. Too numb and too frozen to prevent his fall, he collapsed to the ice floor as the smell of the goat wafted into the room. Cameron half turned. Voight Stubble was at the door, as was the chauffeur, and the third man in the Mercedes. He wore a coat apparently made of several goat skins. The hooves and the horns still hung from it. The blood on its fur was brown and gummy. "What are you doing here, Mr. Cameron?" asked the goat-coated man. Cameron could barely speak. The only feeling left in his head was a pinpoint of agony in the middle of his forehead. "What the hell is going on?" he said, through lips almost too frozen to move. "Precisely that, Mr. Cameron," the man replied. "Hell is going on." As they ran past St. Mary le Strand, Lawyer glanced behind him and stumbled. Joel, a full 3 meters behind the leaders, knew the man was giving up. So quickly, too. There was something amiss. He slackened his pace, letting MacLeod and Voight pass him. No great hurry. Kinderman was quite a way behind, unable to compete with these fast boys. He was the tortoise in this race, for sure. Lawyer was overtaken by MacLeod, then Voight, then finally Jones and Kinderman. His breath had suddenly deserted him, and his legs felt like lead. Worse, he was seeing the tarmac under his running shoes creak and crack, and fingers like loveless children seeking up out of the ground to touch him. Nobody else was seeing them, it seemed. The crowds just roared on, while these illusionary hands broke out of their tarmac graves and secured a hold on him. He collapsed into their dead arms, exhausted, his youth broken and his strength spent. The inquiring fingers of the dead continued to pluck at him long after the doctors had removed him from the track, examined him, and sedated him. He knew why, of course, lying there on the hot tarmac while they had their pricking way with him. He'd looked behind him. That's what had made them come. He'd looked. And after Lawyer's sensational collapse, the race is open wide. Frank the Flash MacLeod is setting the pace now, and he's really speeding away from the new boy Voight. Joel Jones is even further behind. He doesn't seem to be keeping up with the leaders at all. What do you think, Jim? Well, he's either pooped already or he's really taken the chance that they'll exhaust themselves. Remember, he's new all over this distance. Yes, Jim, and that might make him careless. Certainly he's going to have to do a lot of work to improve on his present position in third place. Joel felt giddy. For a moment, as he'd watched Lawyer begin to lose his grip on the race, he'd heard the man praying out loud, praying to God to save him. He'd been the only one who heard the words, "Yea, though I walk through the shadow of the valley of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they..." The sun was hotter now, and Joel was beginning to feel the familiar voices of his tiring limbs. Running on tarmac was hard on the feet, hard on the joints. Not that that would make a man take to praying. He tried to put Lawyer's desperation out of his mind and concentrate on the matter in hand. There was still a lot of running to do. The race was not even half over. Plenty of time to catch up with the heroes. Plenty of time. As he ran, his brain idly turned over the prayers his mother had taught him in case he should need one, but the years had eroded them. They were all but gone. "My name," said the goat-coated man, "is Gregory Burgess, Member of Parliament. You wouldn't know me. I try to keep a low profile." "MP?" said Cameron. "Yes, independent. Very independent." Is that Voight's brother? Burgess glanced at Voight's other self. He was not even shivering in the intense cold, despite the fact that he was only wearing a thin singlet and shorts. Brother, Burgess said. No, he's my, familiar. The word rang a bell, but Cameron wasn't well read. What was a familiar? Show him, said Burgess magnanimously. Voight's face shook, the skin seeming to shrivel, the lips curling back from the teeth melting into a white wax that poured down a gullet that was itself transfiguring into a column of shimmering silver. The face was no longer human, no longer even mammalian. It had become a fan of knives, their blades glistening into the candlelight through the door. Even as this bizarrerie became fixed, it started to change again, the knives melting and darkening, fur sprouting, eyes appearing and swelling to balloon size. Antennae leapt from this new head, mandibles were extruded from the pulp of transfiguration, and the head of a bee, huge and perfectly intricate, now sat on Voight's neck. Burgess obviously enjoyed the display. He applauded with gloved hands. Familiars both, he said, gesturing to the chauffeur, who had removed the cap and let a welter of auburn hair fall to her shoulders. She was ravishingly beautiful, a face to give your life for, but an illusion like the other, no doubt capable of infinite personae. They're both mine, of course, said Burgess proudly. What? Was all Cameron could manage. He hoped it stood for all the questions in his head. I serve Hell, Mr. Cameron, and in its turn, Hell serves me. Hell? Behind you, one of the entrances to the ninth circle. You know your Dante, I presume. Lo, this and lo, the place where thou hast need to arm thy heart with strength. Why are you here? To run this race. Or rather, my third familiar is already running the race. He will not be beaten this time. This time it is Hell's event, Mr. Cameron. We shall not be cheated of the prize. Hell, said Cameron again. You believe, don't you? You're a good churchgoer. Still pray before you eat like any God-fearing soul, afraid of choking on your dinner? How do you know I pray? Your wife told me. Oh, your wife was very informative about you, Mr. Cameron. She really opened up to me. Very accommodating, a confirmed analyst after my attentions. She gave me so much information. You're a good socialist, aren't you, like your father? Politics now. Oh, politics is the hub of the issue, Mr. Cameron. Without politics, we're lost in a wilderness, aren't we? Even hell needs order. 9 great circles, a pecking order of punishments. Look down. See for yourself. Cameron could feel the hole at his back. He didn't need to look. We stand for order, you know. Not chaos. That's just heavenly propaganda. And you know what will win? It's a charity race. Charity is the least of it. We're not running this race to save the world from cancer. We're running it for government. Cameron half grasped the point. Government, he said. Once every century this race is run from St. Paul's to the Palace of Westminster. Often it has been run in the dead of night, unheralded, unapplauded. Today it is run in full sunshine, watched by thousands. But whatever the circumstance, it is always the same race. Your athletes against one of ours. If you win, another 100 years of democracy. If we win, as we will, the end of the world as you know it. At his back, Cameron felt a vibration. The expression on Burgess's face had abruptly changed. The confidence had become clouded. The smugness was instantly replaced by a look of nervous excitement. Oh, well, he said, his hands flapping like birds. Oh, it seems we're about to be visited by higher powers. How flattering. Cameron turned and peered over the edge of the hole. It didn't matter how curious he was. They had him now. He may as well see there was to see. A wave of icy air blew up from the sunless circle, and in the darkness of the shaft he could see a shape approaching. Its movement was steady, and its face was thrown back to look at the world. Cameron could hear its breathing, see the wound of its features open and close in the murk, oily bone unlocking and locking like the face of a crab. Burgess was on his knees, the 2 familiars flat on the floor to either side of him, faces to the ground. Cameron knew he would have no other chance. He stood up, his limbs hardly under his control, and blundered towards Burgess, whose eyes were closed in reverent prayer. More by accident than intention, his knee caught Burgess under the jaw as he passed, and the man was sent sprawling. Cameron's soul slid on the floor out of the ice cavern and into the candle-lit chamber beyond. Behind him, the room was filling with smoke and sighs, and Cameron, like Lot's wife fleeing from the destruction of Sodom, glanced back just once to see the forbidden sight behind him. It was emerging from the shaft, its grey bulk filling the hole, lit by some radiance from below, its eyes, deep set in the naked bone of its elephantine head, met Cameron's through the open door. They seemed to touch him like a kiss, entering his thoughts through his eyes. He was not turned to salt. Pulling his curious glance away from the face, he skated across the antechamber and started to climb the stairs 2 and 3 at a time, falling and climbing, falling and climbing. The door was still ajar. Beyond it, daylight and the world. He flung the door open and collapsed into the hallway, feeling the warmth already beginning to wake his frozen nerves. There was no noise on the stairs behind him. Clearly they were too in awe of their fleshless visitor to follow him. He hauled himself along the wall of the hallway, his body racked with shivers and chatterings. Still, they didn't follow. Outside, the day was blindingly bright, and he began to feel the exhilaration of escape. It was like nothing he'd ever felt before, to have been so close, yet survived. God had been with him after all. He staggered along the road back to his bicycle, determined to stop the race, to tell the world. His bike was untouched, its handlebars warm as his wife's arms. As he hooked his leg over, the look he had exchanged with hell caught fire. His body, ignorant of the heat in his brain, continued about its business for a moment, putting its feet on the pedals and starting to ride away. Cameron felt the ignition in his head and knew he was dead. The look, the glance behind him. Lot's wife, like Lot's stupid wife. The lightning leapt between his ears faster than thought. His skull cracked, and the lightning, white-hot, shot out from the furnace of his brain. His eyes withered to black nuts in his sockets. He belched light from mouth and nostrils. The combustion turned him into a column of black flesh in a matter of seconds, without a flame or a wisp of smoke. Cameron's body was completely incinerated by the time the bicycle careered off the road and crashed through the tailor's shop window, where it lay, like a dummy, face down amongst the ashen suits. He, too, had looked back.
The crowds at Trafalgar Square were a seething mass of enthusiasm, cheers, tears and flags. It was as though this little race had become something special for these people, a ritual the significance of which they could not know. Yet somewhere in them they understood the day was laden with sulphur. They sensed their lives stood on tiptoe to reach heaven, especially the children. They ran along the route, shouting incoherent blessings, their faces squeezed up with their fears. Some called his name, Joel, Joel, Joel! Or did he imagine that? Had he imagined, too, the prayer from Lawyer's lips and the signs in the radiant faces of the babies held high to watch the runners pass? As they turned into Whitehall, Frank McLeod glanced confidently over his shoulder, and hell took him. It was sudden, it was simple. He stumbled, an icy hand in his chest crushing the life out of him. Joel slowed as he approached the man. His face was purple, his lips foamy. "McLeod," he said, and stopped to stare in his great rival's thin face. McLeod looked up at him from behind a veil of smoke that had turned his grey eyes ochre. Joel reached down to help him. "Don't touch me," McLeod growled. The filament vessels in his eyes bulged and bled. "Cramp?" asked Joel. "Is it cramp?" "Run, you bastard! Run!" McLeod was saying at him, as the hands in his innards seized his life out. He was oozing blood through the pores on his face now, weeping red tears. "Run, and don't look back, for Christ's sake! Don't look back!" "What is it?" "Run for your life." The words weren't requests, but imperatives. Run. Not for gold or glory, just to live. Joel glanced up, suddenly aware that there was some huge-headed thing at his back, cold breath on his neck. He picked up his heels and ran.
Well, things aren't going so well for the runners here, Jim, after Lawyer going down so sensationally. Now Frank McLeod has stumbled too. I've never seen anything quite like it, but he seems to have had a few words with Joel Jones as he ran past, so he must be okay. McLeod was dead by the time they put him in the ambulance, and putrefied by the following morning. Joel ran. Jesus, did he run. The sun had become ferocious in his face, washing the colour out of the cheering crowds, out of the faces, out of the flags. Everything was one sheet of noise, drained of humanity. Joel knew the feeling that was coming over him, the sense of dislocation that accompanied fatigue and over-oxygenation. He was running in a bubble of his own consciousness, thinking, sweating, suffering by himself, for himself, in the name of himself. And it wasn't so bad, this being alone. Songs began to fill his head, snatches of hymns, sweet phrases from love songs, dirty rhymes. His self idled, and his dream mind, unnamed and fearless, took over. Ahead, washed by the same white rain of light, was Voight. That was the enemy. That was the thing to be surpassed. Voight, with his shining crucifix rocking in the sun. He could do it, as long as he didn't look. As long as he didn't look behind him. Burgess opened the door of the Mercedes and climbed in. Time had been wasted, valuable time. He should be at the Houses of Parliament, at the finishing line, ready to welcome the runners home. There was a scene to play in which he would pretend the mild and smiling face of democracy. And tomorrow? Not so mild. His hands were clammy with excitement, and his pinstripe suit smelt of the goat-skin coat he was obliged to wear in the room. Still, nobody would notice. And even if they did, what Englishman would be so impolite to mention that he smelt goaty? He hated the lower chamber, the perpetual ice, that damn yawning hole with its distant sound of loss. But all that was over now. He'd made his oblations, he'd shown his utter and ceaseless adoration of the pit. Now it was time to reap the rewards. As they drove, he thought of his many sacrifices to ambition. At first, minor stuff. Kittens and cockerels. Later, he was to discover how ridiculous they thought such gestures were, but at the beginning he'd been innocent, not knowing what to give or how to give it. They began to make their requirements clear as the years went by, and he, in time, learned to practice the etiquette of selling his soul. His self-mortifications were studiously planned and immaculately staged, though they had left him without nipples or the hope of children. It was worth the pain, though. The power came to him by degrees, a triple first at Oxford, a wife endowed beyond the dreams of priapism, a seat in Parliament, and soon enough, the country itself. The cauterized stumps of his thumbs ached, as they often did when he was nervous. Idly, he sucked on one. Well, we're now in the closing stages of what really has been one hell of a race, eh, Jim? Oh, yes, it's really been a revelation, hasn't it? Voight is really the outsider of the field, and here he is, streaking away from the competition without much effort. Of course, Jones made the unselfish gesture of checking with Frank McLeod that he was indeed all right after that bad fall of his, and that put him behind. It's lost the race for Jones, really, hasn't it? I think that's right. I think it's lost the race for him. This is a charity race, of course. Absolutely. And in a situation like this, it's not whether you win or lose. It's how you play the game. Right. Well, they're both in sight of the Houses of Parliament now as they come round the bend for Whitehall, and the crowds are cheering their boy on, but I really think it's a lost cause. Mind you, he bought something special out of the bag in Sweden. He did. Maybe he'll do it again. Joel ran, and the gap between himself and Voight was beginning to close. He concentrated on the man's back, his eyes boring into his shirt, learning his rhythm, looking for weaknesses. There was a slowing there. The man was not as fast as he had been. An unevenness had crept into his stride, a sure sign of fatigue. He could take him. With courage, he could take him. And Kinderman, he'd forgotten about Kinderman. Without thinking, Joel glanced over his shoulder and looked behind him. Kinderman was way back, still keeping his steady marathon runner's pace unchanged. But there was something else behind Joel. Another runner, almost on his heels, ghostly, vast. He averted his eyes and stared ahead, cursing his stupidity. He was gaining on Voight with every pace. The man was really running out of steam, quite clearly. Joel knew he could take him for certain if he worked at it. Forget his pursuer, whatever it was, forget everything except overtaking Voight. But the sight at his back wouldn't leave his head. "Don't look back,"
McLeod's words. Too late, he'd done it. Better to know then who this phantom was. He looked again. At first, he saw nothing, just Kinderman jogging along. And then the ghost runner appeared once more, and he knew what had brought McLeod and Lawyer down. It was no runner, living or dead. It wasn't even human. A smoky body and yawning darkness for its head. It was hell itself that was pressing on him. Don't look back. Its mouth, if mouth it was open. Breath so cold it made Joel gasp, swirled around him. That was why Lawyer had muttered prayers as he ran. Much good it had done him. Death had come anyway. Joel looked away, not caring to see hell so close, tried to ignore the sudden weakness on his knees. Now Voight too was glancing behind him. The look on his face was dark and uneasy, and Joel knew somehow that he belonged to hell, that the shadow behind him was Voight's master. Voight, 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 Joel expelled the word with every stride. Voight heard his name being spoken. Black bastard, he said aloud. Joel's stride lengthened a little. He was in 2 meters of Hell's runner. Look behind you, said Voight. I see it. It's come for you. The words were mere melodrama, two-dimensional. He was master of his body, wasn't he? And he was not afraid of darkness. He was painted in it. Wasn't that what made him less than human as far as so many people were concerned? Or more? More than human, bloodier, sweatier, fleshier, more arm, more leg, more head, more strength, more appetite. What could hell do? Eat him, he'd taste foul on the palate. Freeze him, he was too hot-blooded, too fast, too living. Nothing would take him. He was a barbarian with the manners of a gentleman, neither day nor night entirely. Voight was suffering. His pain was in his torn breath, in the gangling rags of his stride. They were just 50 metres from the steps and the finish line, but Voight's head was being steadily eroded. Each step brought the runners closer. Then the bargains began. Listen to me. What are you? Power. I'll get you power. Just let us win. Joel was almost at his side now. Too late. His legs elated, his mind span with pleasure. Hell behind him, hell beside him. What did he care? He could run. He passed Voight, joints fluent, an easy machine. Bastard, 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 the familiar was saying, his face contorted with the agonies of stress. And didn't that face flicker as Joel passed it by? Didn't its features seem to lose, momentarily, the illusion of being human? Then Voight was falling behind him, and the crowds were cheering, and the colours were flooding back into the world. It was victory ahead. He didn't know for what cause, but victory nevertheless. There was Cameron. He saw him now, standing on the steps beside a man Joel didn't know, a man in a pinstripe suit. Cameron was smiling and shouting with an uncharacteristic enthusiasm, beckoning to Joel from the steps. He ran, if anything, a little faster towards the finish line, his strength coped by Cameron's face. Then the face seemed to change. Was it the heat haze that had made his hair shimmer? No, the flesh of his cheeks was bubbling now, and there were dark patches growing darker still on his neck, at his forehead. Now his hair was rising up from his head, and cremating light was flickering up from his scalp. Cameron was burning, and still the smile, and still the beckoning hand. Joel felt sudden despair. Hell behind, hell in front. This wasn't Cameron. Cameron was nowhere to be seen, so Cameron was gone. He knew it in his gut. Cameron was gone, and this black parody that smiled at him and welcomed him was his last moments, replayed for the delight of his admirers. Joel's step faltered, the rhythm of his stride lost. At his back he heard Voight's breath, horridly thick, come closer. His whole body suddenly revolted. His stomach demanded to throw up its contents. His legs cried out to collapse. His head refused to think, only to fear. Run, he said to himself. Run, run, run. But hell was ahead. How could he run into the arms of such foulness? Voight had closed the gap between them and was at his shoulder, jostling him as he passed. The victory was being snatched from Joel easily, sweets from a babe. The finishing line was a dozen strides away, and Voight had the lead again, scarcely aware of what he was doing. Joel reached out and snatched at Voight as he ran, grabbing his singlet. It was a cheat, clear to everybody in the crowd. But what the hell? He pulled hard at Voight, and both men stumbled. The crowd parted as they veered off the track and fell heavily, Voight on top of Joel.
Joel's arm, flung out to prevent him falling too heavily, was crushed under the weight of both bodies. Caught badly, the bone of his forearm cracked. Joel heard it snap a moment before he felt the spasm, then the pain threw a cry out of his mouth. On the steps, Burgess was screeching like a madman. Quite a performance. Cameras were snapping, commentators commentating. "Get up! Get up!" the man was yelling. But Joel had snatched Voight with his one good arm, and nothing was going to make him let go. The tool rolled around in the gravel, every roll crushing Joel's arm and sending spurts of nausea through his gut. The familiar playing Voight was exhausted. It had never been so tired, unprepared for the stress of the race its master had demanded it run. Its temper was short, its control perilously close to snapping. Joel could smell its breath on his face, and it was the smell of a goat. "Show yourself," he said. The thing's eyes had lost their pupils. They were all white now. Joel hawked up a clot of phlegm from the back of his thick, spittled mouth and spat it in the familiar's face. Its temper broke. The face dissolved. What had seemed to be flesh sprouted into a new resemblance, a devouring trap without eyes or nose or ears or hair. All round the crowd shrank back. People shrieked, people fainted. Joel saw none of this, but heard the cries with satisfaction. This transformation was not just for his benefit. It was common knowledge. They were seeing it all. The truth. The filthy, gaping truth. The mouth was huge, and lined with teeth like the maw of some deep-water fish, ridiculously large. Joel's one good arm was under its lower jaw, just managing to keep it at bay, as he cried for help. Nobody stepped forward. The crowd stood at a polite distance, still screaming, still staring, unwilling to interfere. It was purely a spectator sport, wrestling with the devil. Nothing to do with them. Joel felt the last of his strength falter. His arm could keep the mouth at bay no longer. Despairing, he felt the teeth at his brow and at his chin, felt them pierce his flesh and his bone, felt, finally, the white night invade him as the mouth bit off his face. The familiar rose up from the corpse with strands of Joel's head dangling out from between its teeth. It had taken off the features like a mask, leaving a mess of blood and jerking muscle. In the open hole of Joel's mouth, the root of his tongue flapped and spurted, past speaking sorrow. Burgess didn't care how he appeared to the world. The race was everything. A victory was a victory, however it was won, and Jones had cheated after all. "Here!" he yelled to the familiar. "Heel!" It turned its blood-strung face to him. "Come here!" Burgess ordered at it. They were only a few yards apart, a few strides to the line, and the race was won. "Run to me!" Burgess screeched. "Run, run, run!" The familiar was weary, but it knew its master's voice. It loped towards the line, blindly following Burgess's calls. 4 paces, 3, and Kinderman ran past it to the line. Short-sighted Kinderman, a pace ahead of Voight, took the race without knowing the victory he'd won, without even seeing the horrors that were sprawled at his feet. There were no cheers as he passed the line, no congratulations. The air around the steps seemed to darken, and an unseasonal frost appeared in the air. Shaking his head apologetically, Burgess fell to his knees. "Our Father who wert in heaven, unhallowed be thy name." Such an old trick, such a naive response. The crowd began to back away. Some people were already running. Children, knowing the nature of the dark, having been so recently touched by it, were the least troubled. They took their parents' hands and led them away from the spot like lambs, telling them not to look behind them, and their parents half remembered the womb, the first tunnel, the first aching exit from a hallowed place, the first terrible temptation to look behind and die. Remembering, they went with their children. Only Kinderman seemed untouched. He sat on the steps and cleaned his glasses, smiling to have won, indifferent to the chill. Burgess, knowing his prayers were insufficient, turned tail and disappeared into the Palace of Westminster. The familiar deserted, relinquished all claim to human appearance and became itself. Insolid, insipid, it spat out the foul-tasting flesh of Joel Jones. Half chewed, the runner's face lay on the gravel beside his body. The familiar folded itself into the air and went back to the circle it called home. It was stale in the corridors of power. No life, no help. Burgess was out of condition, and his running soon became a walk. A steady step along the gloom-panelled corridors, his feet almost silent on the well-trodden carpet. He didn't quite know what to do.
Clearly, he would be blamed for his failure to plan against all eventualities. But he was confident he could argue his way out of that. He would give them whatever they required as recompense for his lack of foresight, an ear, a foot. He had nothing to lose but flesh and blood. But he had to plan his defence carefully because they hated bad logic. It was more than his life was worth to come before them with half-formed excuses. There was a chill behind him. He knew what it was. Hell had followed him along these silent corridors, even into the very womb of democracy. He would survive, though, as long as he didn't turn round, as long as he kept his eyes on the floor, or on his thumbless hands. No harm would come to him. That was one of the first lessons one learnt, dealing with the gulfs. There was a frost in the air. Burgess's breath was visible in front of him, and his head was aching with cold. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely to his pursuer. The voice that came back to him was milder than he'd expected.
It wasn't your fault.
"No," said Burgess, taking confidence from its conciliatory tone. It was an error, and I am contrite. I overlooked Kinderman."
That was a mistake. We all make them.
Said Hell.
Still, in another 100 years, we'll try again. Democracy is still a new cult. It's not lost its superficial glamour yet. We'll give it another century and have the best of them then.
Yes,
But you,
I know.
no power for you, Gregory.
No,
It's not the end of the world. Look at me.
not at the moment, if you don't mind. Burgess kept walking, steady step upon steady step. Keep it calm, keep it rational.
Look at me, please.
Hell cooed. Later, sir.
I'm only asking you to look at me. A little respect would be appreciated.
I will. I really will. Later. The corridor divided here. Burgess took the left-hand fork. He thought the symbolism might flatter. It was a cul-de-sac. Burgess stood still facing the wall. The cold air was in his marrow, and the stumps of his thumbs were really giving him jip. He took off his gloves and sucked hard.
Look at me. Turn around and look at me.
Said the courteous voice. What was he to do now? Back out of the corridor and find another way was best. Presumably he'd have to walk around and around in circles until he'd argued his point sufficiently well for his pursuer to leave him be. As he stood, juggling the alternatives available to him, he felt a slight ache in his neck.
Look at me.
The voice said again, and his throat was constricted. There was, strangely, a grinding in his head, the sound of bone rasping bone. It felt like a knife was lodged in the base of his skull.
Look at me.
Hell said one final time, and Burgess' head turned. Not his body, that stayed standing, facing the blank wall of the cul-de-sac, but his head cranked around on its slender axis, disregarding reason and anatomy. Burgess choked as his gullet twisted on itself like a flesh rope, his vertebrae screwed to powder, his cartilage to fibre mush. His eyes bled, his ears popped, and he died looking at that sunless, unbegotten face.
I told you to look at me.
Said Hell, and went its bitter way, leaving him standing there, a fine paradox for the Democrats to find when they came, bustling with words, into the Palace of Westminster.